And if you don't know the story, you will know the story. I shared the documentary that Roger put up on the internet, and you may not know just how far back this story of Lawfare goes and the details of it. And I appreciate there's some politics in the Bitcoin world that I don't understand, and I will never understand because I still don't understand Bitcoin. But we're here. Roger, Tracy, or I should say Tracy and Roger, thank you very much for being here. I get start from the absolute beginning, Roger, for those who may be discovering you for the first time. 30,000 foot overview, elevator pitch. Who are you? And then we're going to get into how you ended up where you are.
Yeah, I was born and raised in Silicon Valley, been around computers my entire life. And about 15 years ago, I heard about Bitcoin and it changed my life. And I went on to be the very first person in the entire world to start investing in Bitcoin startups. I seeded the entire first generation of Bitcoin businesses, trying to make this usable for people all over the world. So like we were talking about the Canadian truckers, we were trying to make it so that people like them specifically wouldn't be subject to the whims of dictators like Trudeau shutting down their bank accounts because they had a political view that he didn't appreciate. So the entire goal with cryptocurrencies is to put people in charge of their own money. And so I've been involved in that nearly 15 years full time now. But sometimes when you put people in charge of their own things and take away government's power, people in government that think that government is supposed to be the master of the people, they really don't like that. So I've been the victim of lawfare for more than 25 years at this point, because I ran for political office as a libertarian back in the year 2000. Called the ATF and FBI some things in reference to burning to death little kids in a church in Waco, Texas. Once you're on their radar, it's hard to ever be off their radar. And at this point, I'm 46 years old. I doubt I'll ever be off their radar, but luckily we have a new administration that's much, 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 much friendlier towards cryptocurrency and self-sovereignty and people being in charge of their own lives. And so I'm hoping they'll be able to see just how vindictive the lawfare being used against me by people who hate freedom and hate America and the Biden administration was. And hopefully all the charges will be dropped, or there'll be a preemptive pardon or whatever it takes to get these, fake charges out of my life. I have enough to deal with already without fake charges from the government continuing to this very day.
We're going to get there. And if I was smirking, it wasn't because of, I know what you said about Waco. And I the only reason I'm smirking is I've never met a libertarian who's not eccentric. so that makes it makes a little more sense in that sense. We'll go back because Barnes and I talked about, you going to federal prison for 10 months for selling fireworks, which were, destined or repurchased and sold to scare off birds and farms, unless I'm mistaken. But it starts with you running for the Libertarian Party back in 1999, publicly excoriating the FBI, intelligence, CIA, whatever you want to call it, for the handling of Waco, and then a prosecution for reselling what I understand were bona fide fireworks via buying them on the internet and reselling them, and then they put you in jail for 10 months. Explain that for people.
Yeah, so I first saw these firecrackers for sale in Cabela's sporting goods catalog. It's the biggest sporting goods catalog in the entire United States, and basically they're just that. It's a firework that makes noise that farmers can use to scare birds out of their cornfield. And so I bought them from Cabela's and then saw that I could sell them for more on eBay. And this was back when eBay was first getting started. So I buy them from Cabela's and then resell them on eBay. And then later on, I found the distributor that Cabela's was buying them from and bought them from that distributor and resold them on eBay. And so I didn't make a huge amount of money selling them. It was just something as a teenage boy. Of course, teenage boys love fireworks. And so I can have something I like and make money with it at the same time. But Cabela's had no license to be selling these. The manufacturer had no license to be selling these. The distributors had no license to be selling these. Nobody thought they needed a license. In fact, they were marketed in Cabela's, legal in all 50 states. And so I didn't think I would have any problem with these whatsoever. And it turned out I was the only person ever in the entire history of the world to ever have any sort of a legal problem for selling these. They decided to prosecute me for dealing in explosives without a license. A little fun fact is anything having to do with explosives is automatically considered to be a violent felony. So not only am I a felon in the U.S., I'm a violent felon as well, which has caused all sorts of additional problems in my life since then. But I wound up signing a plea agreement, agreeing to do between 8 and 14 months in prison. Whereas if I had taken it to trial and lost, and I would have lost because I was guilty of the law as written, even though it was selectively applied in my case, I would have done 7 or 8 years in prison. Basically, and my attorney, the U.S. attorney, everybody told me I'd be showing up to what's called a federal prison camp. And they said it'll be just like going to summer camp, only everybody's older and you'll be there with a bunch of doctors, lawyers, and drug dealers. Turns out the judge and the prosecutor and my attorney have no say whatsoever as to what security level prison you go to. And because I was deemed a violent felon, because it had to do with explosives, I went to a Lompoc FCI, so a medium-low security facility, not a minimum security facility. And definitely not like any summer camp I have ever been to. I have a whole video up on YouTube talking about my experience there where a prison guard's literally planted a shank on me, and for those that don't know and have been to prison, a shank is like an improvised knife. I just, didn't have the best experience there. I spent the whole time reading books while I was there. And then when I got out, I had 3 years of federal probation where these probation officers harassed me and harassed my business and harassed my friends and family and employees and just caused a nightmare for me for the next 3 years. And it literally drove me out of the country. Literally the day I was allowed to leave the U.S., I left to stop the harassment that these people were waging against me, this campaign of terror they had going on against me. And then I stayed silent about politics. I didn't tell anybody about politics at all until Bitcoin came along. And Bitcoin was just far too exciting for me not to get involved full time and start telling people, hey, this is going to change the way all of power structures in society work. Everybody needs to get involved with this right now, start using Bitcoin as money, learn all about it. And by investing the money that I had earned from my previous business, people all over the world started, paying attention to myself and Bitcoin. I paid for national radio ads on more than 100 radio stations across the country back in 2011 when Bitcoin was just a few dollars each. So that's how early I was to the space. And people that are much newer to Bitcoin, they don't know the history about this and what was going on. But I invite them, go on Google. Google's your friend. You can learn anything you want about it there. But
and not to belabor the fireworks or firecracker thing. What you sold was the Pest Control Report 2000. Was that the right firecracker?
That's exactly right. Yeah.
Sorry, and it is a pest control firecracker that you presumably light to scare off animals. And they went after you because you have to explain the Lawfare early on where they said when they're prosecuting you for this. Explain the context who was it? FBI, CIA, or not CIA, FBI, or one of the ATF said.
Yeah, the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms and the FBI. And so I was invited to debate the Republican to Democratic candidates at the San Jose State University debate there. And in that debate, I literally called the FBI and ATF a bunch of jackbooted thugs and murderers for for burning to death little kids. If you burn to death little kids, even if their parents are, wanted criminals, you don't burn to death little kids. And imagine if a robber broke into my house and I try and, catch the robber with a gun. I start shooting up the place and I, shoot, a bunch of the kids living in the neighbor's house and they die. I would go to jail forever for murdering little kids, even though I was trying to catch a real robber or a rapist or some bad guy. Why is there a double standard when the ATF kills a bunch of kids, even if they're trying to catch actual criminals? Why do they get a free pass for having murdered a whole bunch of kids? And I think the answer is that they shouldn't. And if you murder little kids, you're a murderer. And I said these sort of things in that debate. And boy, did it make them mad. And so they started looking into me and who is this young guy? And I was, I think, 20 years old at that point and, already was starting my business in life and had a number of employees and things were headed in the right direction. And so they started looking into me and, hey, what can we prosecute this guy for? What sort of lawfare can we wage against this guy? And the thing they found was that I was selling these Pest Control Report 2000 firecrackers. And even while I was in federal prison for selling these, Cabela's sporting goods catalog was still selling the exact same item. These other distributors were still selling the exact same item. The manufacturer was still making them, all of them doing this without a permit. They were all committing the exact same crime that I was in prison for having committed. And so, yeah, there's a picture of them on the screen. That's exactly what I was selling.
It does look a little bigger than the firecrackers we used to buy, in Chinatown in Montreal when we were kids. But you're 20 years old. You have this business going on. You're running for the Libertarian Party. Young and Libertarian seem to go hand in hand. And then they lock you away based on a plea agreement for 10 months in conditions that I can only, first of all, summer camp, it depends on what camp you go to. Bad things happen at summer camp, and prison summer camp sounds like worse things happen there. You do your 10 months, you get out, and this is now, we're going to be in 2000, right? Give or take?
No, so let's say I went into prison in 2002 because it took some time with the negotiations and this and that, and was released in 2003.
And one more thing, Viva. If anyone has any doubt as to whether this was lawfare, there was a meeting between Roger, you were in the present of the meeting, I was there. His attorney, the prosecutor, and an agent for the ATF. And Roger's attorney was talking to the prosecutor saying, look, you're not going after anyone else for this. Normally you'd just tell my client, go get a license. You wouldn't be prosecuting him for this. You'd maybe fine him, but you wouldn't be trying to send him to prison. What's going on? And the prosecutor was leaning into that and, kind of admitting there was truth to that. And at that point, the ATF agent pounded his fist on the table and said, but you didn't hear what Roger said about us. So that clears up completely whether this was lawfare or not. That is lawfare. That's pure lawfare. And this was early.
Was the meeting wasn't transcribed? There was no.
No, it was an in-person meeting, but I was there, saw it with my own eyes. So.
That's unbelievable.
And so,
heard it with my ears, yeah.
As a young man hearing that, you have to know in that moment that this agency is not going to be finished with you. And what you experienced on parole suggested that was.
On probation, yeah, they were harassing me, but it was clear. They weren't mad about anything that I had done. They were mad about the things that I had said. And so if you think these ideas that they don't like, they'll come after you simply for having, the wrong thoughts in your brain. And that's exactly what this was about.
So actually, I'm interested in the period before you get into Bitcoin. You're released, say, 2003, 2004. What happens between then and 2011? And then we got to get into the time frame in which you leave the country and renounce your citizenship. But what happens in the period after you're released and up until Bitcoin comes around?
So I had my own business called memorydealers.com, and I was selling computer components to people all over the world. And as part of that business, I need to be able to go and travel and meet the customers. I was the main sales guy for that business. And so I would file like request after request to be able to travel to different business meetings for my business. And remember, before I'd gone to prison, while I was on what's called pretrial release, the judge had allowed me to travel internationally. They said, we don't think Mr. Veer poses any flight risk whatsoever, and I could go wherever I wanted, and it wasn't a problem. Once I got out of prison, I had already served my time. They're refusing and denying every single travel request I would put in. And at some point, I compiled a whole spreadsheet. I think I had submitted something like 70 travel requests, and every single one had been denied. And so then I had to hire a lawyer to go in front of the court and say, hey, Roger needs to be able to travel for his business. And to the judge's credit, the judge said, okay, yeah, Roger needs to be able to travel for his business. Roger, you just need to tell the probation officer where you're going and when you're going. You don't have to ask him, you just tell him. And that really made the probation officer angry there as well. And just the whole time, he was just so rude and belittling towards me. And literally, he told me to my face that, oh, you're much too dangerous to be allowed to go anywhere that would require flying on an airplane. And who do you think I am? I'm just a computer nerd who likes computers. I sell computer parts over the internet. And they were just over and over and over again, just rude and demeaning and belittling towards me. And another example of that, my business in the Silicon Valley there, we had a break-in one night. Somebody literally crashed a car through the roll-up door at my business, and they came in and they stole more than $1 million worth of computer parts. After I found the parts, I found who had my stolen parts a couple weeks later. I think fantastic. I called the local police and I say, hey, I found the parts that were stolen. They did nothing. I called the parts were down in LA at that point. I called the LAPD. They did nothing. I called the FBI. They did nothing. They did absolutely nothing. Yet I had spent a whole bunch more money fortifying my office building so that I wouldn't have another break-in again and wouldn't have more parts. They didn't send the Santa Clara Police Department out telling me I have to undo all the locks and take off the different doors and the different security devices I put in place, because they said, oh, it's a fire hazard if all the doors can be locked at night. And they're harassing me over that, but they won't go and get back the parts that have been stolen from me. And then it was just month after month, year after year of harassment from these people. It just drove me nuts. And here I am, 20 years later, still frustrated by the whole experience.
Well, so the lawfare against you by the IRS started during that time period too.
I got audited over and over and over again by both federal and state agencies. And every year I passed with flying colors, because I knew if you cross these people, they will ruin your life. And so my instructions to all of my CFO and my tax accountants and everybody, we have to do everything perfectly. I know I'm a target. Let's do everything perfectly all the time. And that had been my MO for years and years and years. And everything was fine until I guess that brings us to why I'm on your show here today. The current IRS indictment, it's literally a pack full of lies, because they know I did everything properly. And they literally had to lie in the indictment in order to try and even have any sort of an indictment at all against me, because my instructions to my tax attorneys and tax accountants and all the people who worked for me is do everything perfect. I know I'm a giant target for the IRS. I know they're going to audit me. We have to do everything perfect. And we did do everything to the absolute very best of our ability. And that's why the IRS literally had to lie in their indictment to get their indictment across.